Witches. Though the modern concept of witches really solidified itself sometime around the early European colonization of the Americas, witches are far older than that and have been deeply entrenched in storytelling worldwide. They are a staple of the fantasy subgenre and have found their way into European traditions, playing villains in fairy tales. In the 20th century, villains started to take on protagonist roles in shows such as Bewitched and then later Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And when it comes to books, witches really hit their peak in the early 2000s with that series that every millennial seems to have based their entire personality around. But it's not the early 2000s anymore, and there are so many books about witchcraft and wizardry out there. In fact, there's so many with queer leads that I could not even attempt to fit all of that reading into one list. So this is by no means an extensive look into queer books about witchcraft and wizardry, but think of it as part one in a series that I plan to pick up occasionally again in the future, maybe around Halloween next year or something like that. Ha! But without further ado, in order to start this, we have to start part one. I'm Otter, and here are 7 queer books that feature witchcraft and wizardry. Number 1, Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. If you watched my Halloween video, then you're probably familiar with Cemetery Boys because it was the first on that list as well. It's the only repeat here, but if you want more information, there is a link in the card or in the description. I won't go into full details on it because I've already covered it, but I could not make a list about witchcraft and wizardry without my favorite trans brujo. Honestly, this book is so good that it deserves the second shout out, and if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's one of my favorites. Number 2, White Trash Warlock by David R. Slayton. Adam hasn't spoken to his brother in years, and after Bobby had him committed for hearing magical voices and left their trailer park behind, he is happy to keep it that way. But when a mysterious magical illness takes hold of Bobby's wife, he calls on his magical brother for help. Adam begrudgingly leaves his backwoods bubble in Oklahoma and travels up to Denver in order to figure out what is wrong. Soon, though, the malicious spirit possessing her sets its sights on Adam, and he must turn to the elves, like his ex-boyfriend, for help, becoming a pawn in the Immortals game. The first book in the Adam Binder series, White Trash Warlock manages to ride the line between fun and serious, light-hearted and dark. Though from the title one might worry that Slayton would fall into overdone stereotypes in order to have comedic effect, it was very refreshing to see that he did not go in that direction. These characters are rich and varied, and while they are not stereotypes of their upbringing, it has certainly informed who they are. This story of family drama, set amidst a malicious magical threat, combines witchcraft and mystery, as many of my favorite books in this subgenre do. Add in a sprinkle of an awkward love triangle and you have a recipe for a page-turner. Slayton drip feeds clues and red herrings in equal measure, and by the end of the book my jaw was on the floor. If you're a fan of lowbrow characters dealing with high drama in magical worlds that commingle with our own, then I highly recommend that you pick this title up. Number 3, Witchmark by C.L. Polk. Content warning: post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Miles Singer has a secret. He is actually Sir Christopher, son of one of the most powerful men in the country, a member of the aristocracy made up of powerful mages who hide their magical prowess from the general population. When a dying witch is brought to his veterans' hospital, Miles gets swept up in unraveling the man's murder with a mysterious stranger. They must figure out whether the death is connected to the murderous delusions that seem to only plague the soldiers returning from the war, all the while dodging his manipulative family, who, if they found out he was still alive, would once again attempt to bind him to his Stormsinger sister as her secondary, a sort of living battery for magical energy. Miles doesn't have much time to spare either. With his new compatriot set to leave the city at the end of the month, he needs to find an answer before he leaves. This first book in the Kingston Cycle trilogy sets the scene of an Edwardian England-inspired world, making the transition to electricity, or as they call it, ether. Witchmark has the feeling of a World War I historical fantasy, but it's not set in our actual history. The book is a nesting doll of mysteries, with layers of intrigue to keep your mind wondering how it all ties together. There was rarely a moment during my read-through where I wasn't juggling trying to piece together all of the facts while wondering whether or not they even related to each other at all. And when everything finally comes to a head, you are left with a really satisfying aha moment. As an introduction to this world, it does a fantastic job of setting up this series with leaving the implications of everything that's happening as an intriguing cliffhanger to explore in the later books. If you're a fan of pseudo-historical settings, mysteries, or high-speed bicycle chases, then this may just be the book for you. Number 4. Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. Packet. Pacat. Passat. One of those. Content warning, racism. It is depicted in a negative light, though. Will Kempen is a boy on the run. After his mother was killed, he escaped her murderers by hiding in plain sight as a dockhand. But when he is discovered, it starts him down a path to a hidden world of ancient magic. Taken in by the stewards, an order of knights keeping watch for the return of the feared Dark King, Will, along with his new friend Violet, begin to learn the truth about a prophecy that the long-dead villain will be reborn. And the blood of the lady, which is Will's mother's legacy, is the only thing that can defeat him. But can Will and Violet stop the Dark King's servants in time to stop his ascent? The best way that I could describe Dark Rise would be if you take all of the most popular tropes of the fantasy genre, toss them in a blender, and just pour that over Georgian England. In this story, our orphaned British protagonist, with a distinctive scar, learns of a hidden magical world where, surprise, he's the chosen one, destined to defeat the Dark Lord, who's returning to power as we speak. He's whisked away to a hidden castle that most people don't know anything about, where he's taught magic. I know that sounds kind of familiar, but here, how about this? He inherited his magical abilities from his mother, whose mantle he is burdened with taking up after her death. But he struggles to connect to these powers that everyone assumes that he just will naturally be able to do. And his Indian friend takes up sword fighting, making sure that she can protect him in his magical destiny. Oh, that sounds familiar too. Okay, but how about this? Part of the army controlled by this Dark Lord who was defeated long ago are the husks of what used to be men. These men were corrupted when they put on evil relics, and those relics turned them into remnants. Different thing, totally. And early in the story, these remnants are chasing our protagonist, and just as he crosses a river, a woman on a white horse repels these evil horse-riding remnants, saving him. Oh wait, I could go on citing examples, but you get the point. The first 90% of this book reads like an average at best rehashing of these well-used tropes. And honestly, it cycles back on itself so often that you wonder if the author's being paid by the word. This also seemingly falls into the unfortunate typecasting of a bisexual love triangle where the heterosexual option is sweet and innocent, but the homosexual option is sinister and manipulative, and evil, wrong. And I'm not going to fully knock it because those manipulative flirtations are the best writing in the entire book, in my opinion. But still, it feels kind of... I was very close to just writing this book off as meh, but then the last 10% of the book happened. The end of this book sets up a promising series to come and recontextualizes everything that came before. That first 90% means a lot different things once you get to the end. And yeah, as I was getting to the end there, I was convinced that when the sequel finally came out, there was no way I was ever gonna pick it up. But now that I've actually finished the book, yeah, probably. If you are a fan of the Chosen One, Dark Lord, love triangle, and hidden magical world tropes, then perhaps you should give this one a try. It might just surprise you. Number 5. The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. Content warning, abusive parent, and abortion. The Eastwood sisters, Juniper, Agnes, and Bella, went their separate ways years ago, each placing the blame on the others for their estrangement. But fate intercedes, bringing them back together in St. George's Square in New Salem. This typical turn-of-the-century town has rebuilt itself as a sinless version of its predecessor, which was burned down long ago, with the last 3 remaining Western witches. But at a women's suffrage demonstration, the mysterious Tower of Avalon those witches had called home materializes before the sisters' eyes, starting them on the trail to hunt for the words and the ways to bring back the magic that was lost to the flames. Along the way, they are confronted with religious zealots, holier-than-thou politicians, and mobs whose fear of witchcraft echoes that of the original Salem, leading them to wonder if they can rally the women of the city to help them discover the lost way of Avalon before they end up tied to the stake themselves. This historical fantasy tale definitely tackles a lot, framing itself around the women's suffrage movement and what would have happened if witchcraft were something that really existed back then. It also tackles ideas of how different people cope with an abusive parent, or how an unmarried pregnant woman was treated in the 1890s, or the difference between black and white communities and how they navigated society back then, plus many, many more things. The magic system is based around the idea that children's nursery rhymes are actually magic spells in disguise. And everything in this world comes in 3s. Everyone has 3 names. There are 3 sisters. Magic requires the words, will, and way to do it. The last witches were the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And everything is 3s. Their symbol is 3 circles. It's a very 3-heavy symbolic structure, to say the least, and the book definitely happens in 3 major acts. In Harrow's world, knowledge is literal power, and those in power do everything they can to limit the knowledge of those that they're trying to control, much like the real world. The pacing is, in my opinion, slower than it should be, and the author spends a lot of time holding your hand instead of trusting the reader to read between the lines. But that being said, this is a fascinating peek into what history might have been like if magic existed, and it takes interesting turns that I would not have predicted at the outset. If you're a fan of slow burn plot that lets you really immerse yourself in a time and place, magic systems based on the familiar, fairy tale retellings, or strong female characters who are strong in a variety of different ways and come together for a common cause, then this might just be the book for you. Number 6, Trans Witch,
College of Secrets
by E. Chris Garrison. Professor Lily Shelley's wife has gone missing. With few clues as to where she has disappeared to, Lily ends up following an unlikely lead, some of her students. Along the way, she discovers that not only is there a secret wizardry school within the college where she teaches, but her transition has awoken her innate magical abilities late in life. As she dives headfirst into a mysterious world of magical academia, she searches for clues as to what became of Penny. But with her investigations leading her down the same path that led to her wife's disappearance, Lily must tread carefully so as not to suffer the same fate, whatever that may have been. Trans Witch is a story full of fantastic ideas, but if you're looking for beautiful prose and witty dialogue, then this isn't the place to look. The writing style is what you could generously call easy reading. It reminds me a lot of fan fiction. It also reminds me a lot of early 2000s queer fantasy, where there are amazing ideas, but the writing just needs a little polish. If you can look past that lack of polish, though, there is a fun adventure to go on. That being said, this book is still an enjoyable 200 pages to read. If you take it at face value, focusing on the story, you get a tale of a wizard school that centers around a cast of queer characters solving an intriguing mystery. If you're looking for a quick read that reimagines magical academia, then this is a great title to pick up. Number 7, The Fascinators, by Andrew Eliopoulos. Living in small-town Georgia, Sam has always been a little different. Being gay and into magic in an area filled with religious Christians who frown on both. But luckily for him, he has the Fascinators, his high school magic club, which consists of him and his best friends James and Delia. At the beginning of their senior year, things look like they might just go smoothly for the trio at this year's magic convention. Especially since they got a new member. Denver, a transfer student, is the first person to ever attempt to join their club. And the first person to draw Sam's focus away from his not-so-secret crush on James, who himself is spending a lot of time with a new girl. But with James revealing that he ended up on the wrong side of a particularly dangerous cult, and Delia putting off club meetings to focus on her application to the most prestigious magical university, Sam's year ends up going in a direction that he could not have seen coming, even with the most advanced divination. As this group of friends drift further apart, they end up missing the signs of the dangers that await them. The Fascinators sets its world in ours, but if magic were a common everyday occurrence, you do have the religious people that see it as the devil's work, but most people see it as a tool that they can use in their daily life. Instead of developing a complex magical system, the magic here is softer, with the focus turned instead to developing complex characters. As with many of the best young adult titles, this storytelling thrives in drama and secrecy. One can't help but get swept up in who's telling who what and who's keeping what secret from who, or the will they or won't they of this complex love triangle, quadrangle, polygon that's happening here. But that's not to say that there aren't real stakes in the story. Plot-wise, there are dangers and consequences to these characters' actions that make you fear for them as well. If you're a fan of love triangles, teen drama, or character-driven plots with a side of magical death cults, then this may just be a story for you. And that's our list. Thank you so much for joining me. Like I said at the beginning, this is by no means a comprehensive list. I plan on doing parts 2, 3, 4, however many in the future. I've already got some lined up for me, but what are your favorite queer books about witchcraft and wizardry? Let me know in the comments so I can add them to my list and make sure they're here when I get back to this topic in the future. I know I took a month off. I'm a professional dancer outside of this, and it was Nutcracker season, so November and early December are very difficult times for me to have time to do much of anything. I also started a new job. But I'm not going anywhere. These may be less frequent than they were when I first started, but I'm going to continue these lists going into the future, and I hope that you join me for the next one. Until then, have a good one. Let's do this. Can I film this 10 to 15 minute long video in an hour? Find out next. Amidst malicious magical threats. Amidst malicious magical threats. It's very hard to say.